Robo Ted by Mark Alexander. Read by Patsy Kensit.
Good morning, Dome Dwellers. This is Weather Control. Today, screens above Sectors 6, 7, and 8 will be retracted so that those lucky sectoral persons will be able to enjoy some out-of-space sunshine. As a result of a majority vote in Sectors 1 and 2, snow will fall there, while Sector 4 has settled for a fine drizzle. The soft voice of Weather Control from the Tri-Dye screen brought Mandy, 786X, out of a deep sleep in which she had been dreaming about her birthday, which happened to be today. Birthdays are highly important to little girls, and she had asked Mummy and Daddy to take her to the mechanical zoo for a treat. It was said that the robots there were exactly like real animals which were on the earth before people began living in sealed cities. Mandy sat up, and her yawn changed to a cry of joy. Standing in the doorway of her bedroom was a teddy bear as large as herself. "A real Robo Ted! Oh, how lucky I am!" she exclaimed. "Are you the talking model?" she added anxiously.
"Of course. I'm a Mark too," replied
the Robo Ted, walking into the room respectfully.
"Many happy returns of the day, Mandy. May I say how pleased I am to have been chosen as your playmate? You must think up a name for me."
"I've had a name ready for ages and ages," said Mandy. "You are Bimbo. Bimbo 786X. The Robo Ted's eyes sparkled as he said,
"That's a good name, Mandy. I shall like being called Bimbo. Now let me tell you about myself. I can run and jump and do anything that you do, so we can play all sorts of games together. I know hundreds of stories and can sing songs. If my eyes start blinking, it means I need a service."
"I'll look after you ever so carefully," said Mandy. Outside in the corridor, Mr. and Mrs. 786X looked at each other with delighted smiles. "She's so happy," Mandy's mother whispered. "Now she won't feel the odd one out. Nearly every child in her class has a Robo-Ted. I just don't know where some of the parents get the money from." "I don't know where we get the money from," said Mr. 786X. "Robo-Teds don't come cheap. But I must say he's quite an amazing piece of technology. A real thinking machine. When Mandy gets older, he can teach her to play chess and help her with her homework. When I was a girl, my doll Sarah Jane only spoke a few sentences, and she often broke down," said Mandy's mother. "How things have progressed. Soon every child in the dome will be pestering its parents for a Ted." "The extraordinary thing about them is that they have feelings," her husband replied. "Each is programmed to love the child he is assigned to. They like to be treated kindly and to be praised, like human beings, and they can be miserable and sulk if their child friend tells them off. Apparently, the manufacturers decided that if they were to be ideal child companions, they had to have personalities. So, emotional circuits were installed. Do you know that no two Teds have the same character?" "Mummy, Daddy," Mandy called, "come and meet Bimbo. Oh, he's a lovely present."
"Glad you think so,"
said the Robo-Ted, seating himself on the foot of Mandy's bed.
"Did you say we were going to the mechanical zoo today?"
"That's Mandy's birthday treat," Mrs. 786 told him. And then she had the strangest feeling. She had spoken to the big toy bear just as though it were human and not a collection of microchips and circuits. Mandy's father has taken the day off from the news control office, where he had to work for 2 whole hours every day so he could take his wife and daughter out for the treat in his electric carriage. When they returned from the zoo, Mandy had her birthday tea, to which a dozen of her friends were invited. Half of them came with their Robo-Teds, who were very good at organising games and passing round the plates. By the time Weather Control announced that twilight was about to fall, Mandy's eyelids were drooping. Mummy put her to bed and was tucking her up when a voice behind her made her jump.
"If you and Mr. 786X would like to go out for the evening, I will make sure that Mandy is quite safe," said the Robo-Ted. "Should anything go wrong, I can activate my built-in transmitter and safety control would be alerted within seconds."
"Are you sure you wouldn't mind?" asked Mandy's mother. and then realised it was only a machine she was talking to, cuddly looking, but still a machine.
I shall be delighted to babysit. Your daughter is a charming child,
replied the Robo Ted.
I learned at the tea party that some of my colleagues have not been so lucky. One, called Teddy Edward, told me that his child friend blew his circuits the other day when she poked a knitting needle into his tummy.
All right, said Mrs. 786X. It's ages since Frank and I went out for supper. Thank you, Bimbo. In the restaurant, which hung in a spiderweb of silver cables beneath the apex of the dome, Mandy's parents were shown to their table. The weather control screens were still retracted, so they were able to watch the sun drop behind the western hills in a glory of gold and pink. If the screens are not closed immediately, you may even be able to see some stars, the waiter told them. I only do this job because just occasionally it is possible to see the Milky Way from up here. I wonder what it's really like out there, mused Mr. 786X after their order had been taken. There was a faraway look in his eyes as he gazed at the outside, which was now thick with purple dusk. His wife gave a shiver. I feel funny just to think about it, she said. Imagine being out there with no protection, no dome, no weather control. I read that it is an absolute fact that before the domes were built and people actually lived in the open, there was no weather control. Just imagine! And that there were little things living called insects. Ugh! We must be grateful for the nuclear wars, said her husband. If it hadn't been for them and the radiation clouds which drifted round the world, mankind, or what was left of it, would never have gone into domes and we would never have become civilized. Mind you, not everything was bad pre-dome. Take Robo Teds, for example. Robo Teds? I did some research at my office and found that Teds were originally based on a real animal called a bear. I've never seen such a character at the Mechanical Zoo, though. Whatever his ancestors were, I think Bimbo's adorable. Mandy is crazy about him already. I bet it won't be long before there are as many Robo-Teds walking around as children. They sipped their Cynthy wine, an expensive one from a vat in which only the highest quality chemicals were used, and watched the fall of night over the alien world outside. Sylvia, I can't help wondering what will happen when Mandy goes to her number 2 school and will no longer want an animated doll, said Mr. 786X. I suppose there'll be a second-hand market for them, like there is for electric carriages. Anyway, we don't need to worry about that for a while. I think if I had a Robo-Ted when I was small, I'd never wanted to give him up. What a nice wine. It's a vintage, 2185, said her husband with satisfaction. In her bedroom, Mandy opened her eyes and saw twin emeralds glowing in the dark. They were Bimbo's eyes, and their colour told her that he was functioning perfectly. She sighed with happiness and went back to sleep. The craze for Robo-Ted swept the dome, and just as Mandy's mother had predicted, it was soon impossible to find a child under the age of 10 who did not have one. This became a problem on the graceful walkways which curved above the vehicle lanes. With so many Robo-Teds walking with their children, there was unpleasant crowding sometimes, though everyone had to agree that the Robo-Teds were terribly polite and always gave way to humans. Parents found that Robo-Teds were more useful than just play companions for their children. They did odd jobs, such as going to the supermarkets, and were excellent for taking the children to school. Soon, so many were arriving at the number 1 schools each morning that a special room was set aside for them where they chatted quietly to each other until it was time to take their little owners back to their apartments. What Mandy particularly liked about Bimbo was the way he told stories. At bedtime, she gave up watching the Tri-Dye and lay in the snug darkness while he told her a good-night tale. Her favourite, which she asked for over and over again, was Goldilocks and the 3 Robo-Teds. One night, her mother overheard the story and called her husband to come and listen. "Do you think it's a suitable story for a child?" she asked him when it was over. "I thought it was rather good." "But it goes back to the outside. The 3 Robo-Teds lived in a house in the woods. Thank goodness there are no woods in the dome. It's not normal to take an interest in the outside. We have everything we want in the dome, and we should be content with that." I was very relieved when all books, you know, those horrid things made of paper which you had to read, which came from the old world, were vaporized. History Control was quite right. The less we know about the bad time and the outside, the better. At News Control, I have heard a whisper that such an idea is changing among some of our scientists, her husband said quietly, and there have been secret weather control reports that outside radiation levels have dropped, that for some years now it has been possible for humans to leave the dome. Imagine, the first time in 200 years. Of course, it's being kept very hush-hush. Dome Control does not want such news to give us dwellers worrying ideas. But weather control satellites have reported that some vegetation and trees, yes, trees, like in the 3 Robo Ted story, are growing again, and they have even spotted shoals of fish. What are fish? They were a kind of animal that lived in the water, in the big water called the sea. The point is that the outside is not quite as dead as we thought. But it's only of scientific interest, Mr. 786 added when he saw his wife's look of anxiety. Nobody would ever want to leave the dome. A couple of years passed during which Mandy became aware that she was growing taller than Bimbo, and this was a sad reminder that the time was coming when he would be taken from her. Teaching Control had become alarmed to find that children were so fond of their Robo-Teds that they showed no signs of growing out of them, as they did with ordinary toys. The thought of them keeping their Robo-Teds as they grew into adult dome dwellers was unthinkable to Teaching Control. The Robo-Teds might come to take the place of human friends and family, and their influence could become too powerful. It was therefore declared that something drastic must be done. As many parents were too kind-hearted to take their children's companions away, a law was passed that all children starting number 2 schools would have to give up their automated dolls on the first day of term. As nearly all children of Mandy's age had them, it meant that there were going to be thousands of redundant Robo-Teds. "I dread to think what will happen," said Mrs. 786X. "Mandy will be broken-hearted, and so will all her friends." "And there's the Teds," said her husband thoughtfully. "No one seems to have considered them. They may not be human, but they were fitted with human-type circuits. For several years they have loved their child friends and looked after them, and suddenly they are going to be parted and sent to the crusher. What a reward for devotion." "Oh, Fred, you are an old silly. Fancy feeling sorry for robots." During the week before starting her new school, Mandy had fits of crying, and at night clung to Bimbo's paw. "Why do I have to get older?" she wept. "I was so happy with you. Why do things have to change? To think I'll never see you again. You're going to be collected on Monday, and nobody will tell me where you are going." Bimbo said nothing, but his eyes glittered in the darkness of the bedroom. "I begged Mummy and Daddy to let me keep you," Mandy went on. "Mummy said I was too big for dolls, and Daddy said you could do nothing against the law and that the policeman would come and take you away."
"That's right, Mandy,"
said Bimbo.
"There are so many of us Robo-Teds that Ted Control has been set up. It seems that adult humans are afraid their children have grown too fond of us."
"Why do people always have to spoil things?" sobbed Mandy. "Do you have any idea what's going to happen to you?"
"Yes,"
said Bimbo.
"we're going to be recycled."
"Oh, dear Bimbo! What can we do?"
"Listen to me very carefully, Mandy,"
Bimbo said in his softest voice.
"There's something we can do. Tonight, every Robo-Ted in the dome is going to have this talk with his child friend."
For the next half hour, Mandy listened, wide-eyed. "Oh, yes!" she cried when Bimbo finished. "I will! I will!" "Good morning, dome dwellers, and especially you children who are starting your number 2 school today," came a kindly voice from the Tri-Di. "It is a wonderful day for you because you are going to forget childish things and become much more grown up. Think how silly it would be to take dolls to your number 2 schools." "Hurry up, Mandy," called her mother. "Daddy is going to take you in the electric carriage." "What about Bimbo?" demanded the girl. "You must say goodbye to him, dear," said Mrs. 786X. "This morning a gentleman will come and take him to his nice new home." "You're not telling the truth, Mummy," said Mandy. "He will be taken to the crusher and then he'll be dead." "Mandy, darling, he was never alive." "That's all you know!" shouted Mandy and ran from the room. A minute later the door slammed and Mrs. 786 called urgently to her husband. "Mandy's gone off by herself and taken the robot with her. We must get her back or she'll be late for her first day." There was no sign of Mandy or Bimbo in the apartment tower corridors or on the terraces, so her father and near-hysterical mother took an express lift to the plaza below. In this large open space, the morning sun lamp shone on hundreds and hundreds of children, and each child was accompanied by his or her Robo Ted. "What's happening?" wailed Mrs. 786X. "It just came over the Tri-Di that the kids and their Teds are marching down Central Avenue," answered a white-faced man who was staring at the excited children. "And somewhere among them is my Linda and her petty paws." "But Central Avenue leads to—" "That's right," said the man grimly. "The old airlock." At that moment, a Ted-control air chariot flew into the plaza and hovered above the crowd.
Children, return to your parents at once,
came a giant's voice from the chariot's loudspeakers.
All Robo-Teds are to remain exactly where they are standing until further instructions.
For a moment there was silence, and then the sound of children laughing and shouting filled the square as they surged towards Central Avenue.
"Robo-Teds freeze!"
boomed the giant's voice.
If any movement continues towards the airlock, we shall open fire."
There was a stunned silence. Never in the history of the dome had such a terrible threat been made. Then a loud voice, later Mrs. 786 declared that it was Bimbo's, echoed through the plaza.
If you use your guns, you will be shooting your children as well as us. We are going to leave the dome and nothing will stop us.
"Go outside the dome?" parents cried in horrified disbelief. But already there was a strange smell in the air, a scent of soil and wild plants, which they had never experienced before. It told them that the airlock was open for the first time in 2 centuries. 20 minutes later, Mandy passed through it, hand in paw with Bimbo. Ahead of them, a column of children and Robo-Teds wound across the plain. "What is that, touching my face?" she asked wonderingly.
"That's the wind,"
Bimbo answered. "And what is that green ahead of us?"
"Woods,"
said Bimbo.
"That's where we are going to live, just like Goldilocks."